networks with regional ports from a security perspective. And security, sir, is going to be vitally important going forward. Vitally important, sir. I heard the honourable member for the city, as well as the honourable member for Christchurch East Central, when he introduced it, sir, speak to the need to have security, sir, and to speak to security specifically in the port. And we have been doing all that we can, sir, to improve security in the port. When we came into office, there was a case where, on some occasions, 0% of the goods leaving the port were being scanned because the scanners in the port were not working. And that's a serious, serious thing. We are now at about 45%, sir, with an aspiration to have 100% of the goods leaving the port scanned. So that Barbados, sir, is taking this very, very seriously, sir. So I just wanted to put this in an international context. We're not just doing this for doing this sake. This is a big international commitment, sir. Great. And that when we put in place the advanced cargo information system, we are preparing ourselves for that maritime single window, sir, which would allow us to be a much better place to do business, sir. And that Barbados has these aspirations for itself is not a secret. I would have liked to think that Barbados could have been the first country in the world. I mean, that would have been nice. But we may not be the first, sir, but we will be among the first. And, sir, it's in that context, sir, that I wish to support the honourable member, sir, and that to say this is wise and that it is prudent. It's been a long time in coming, sir, but I give it my fullest support. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
You're welcome. Member for St. Michael West.
The Deputy Speaker, and also appreciation to the honourable member of St. Michael South, who was as brief as he indicated he might be, and I would like to try and follow suit, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We are really dealing with improving a system to make it better functionally, to make it serve our national interests in a far better way, to make it serve our business interests in a far more effective and efficient way. But we often or always have to be careful, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that when we treat the systems and we do our best, make our best efforts to improve those systems, that we do not forget the people who have to function within the system. I noted carefully your response to the honourable member for Christchurch East Central when he made his presentation. You talked about all these improvements, but you said nothing about training. Mr. Deputy Speaker spoke to me quite clearly that your mind was on that very point, that we can improve the system and sometimes forget or not treat fully to the interests of the people in the system. Now, the honourable member for Christchurch East Central, I think, also made reference to the fact that there are to be some appointments made. Mostly so, he made reference to appointments made at the top. I think chief and deputy controller and stuff like that, and also made reference to the appointment of a special consultant. Now, I know that recently we've had an issue with other persons lower down the ranks who have been functioning in the capacity of customs officers, but were actually had a designated status of clerical officers. And I know that it was said at that time by the government that the attempt was to be made immediately to make sure that that situation was addressed and changed positively in the interests of those scores of workers. And I would be interested to know as to where we are with that. Because the people in the system matter. You can improve the system all you want. But if you do not improve the lot of those who must serve the system and function in the context of that system, then you may find that some of your actions and initiatives are counterproductive. As we know it in the customs service system which now operates, there are those who are exposed There are those by circumstances of duty who are exposed to the offer of inducements by persons in the business sector who are bent on corruption, who are bent on short-circuiting the system, not paying their full share, not paying fully the duties which are expected of them, and certain circumstances attaching to the work of customs officers, especially those who must do inspections off-site from the customs, the official customs areas at our ports of entry, are exposed to that type of potential inducement from persons who are bent on corrupt practices. That is a reality that has to be addressed. We need better to deal with a situation where the number of containers, let's say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, which have to be inspected and treated to off-site away from the official customs areas, are treated to in a better circumstance, that such officers who are exposed in that way are protected from the potential inducements of those persons, like I said, who are bent on corrupt practices. There are those who may not offer inducements. There are those who would seek to intimidate by threat or potential threat. This is the reality of life in 2019, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And all I'm simply saying in a very broad way is, as we seek to improve the system, let's bear in mind the people who function in the system, especially the officers who are at the center of that service. We do not want to have them anymore exposed to intimidation or exposed to inducement than is necessary. And I put that there as a point of concern. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's not an honest voice in this honorable chamber, I imagine, that would oppose this measure, because you are treating to a situation where a major deficiency around the architecture, the operations architecture of customs services in Barbados manifests itself. And we treated to this with respect to immigration earlier. And so understandably, we do the same with respect to cargo today. But a strategic operations posture is always required. And if Barbados is to become a more mature economy and a more mature state entity, then we have to be, as governments, whatever label we wear, more strategic in our approach to establishing entities, calling into being legislation, and effecting and implementing policy initiatives. We have to be far more strategic than historically we have been. And life in this world in which this country now exists today demands of us that we be far more strategic. And so the customs service is an area of operation about which there must be a more strategic, philosophical approach to the way we pursue these matters. And I believe it is that kind of strategic thinking that brings us to a point where we want to introduce measures such as this to help to improve the systems which now exist. Customs, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is more than simply a checkpoint for cash collection. Historically, perhaps, and much in the past, this may have been the principal consideration, that you're dealing with a checkpoint at which you collect cash from persons who bring in, who import into this country items which are dutiable. So it's a point of revenue collection for government, for the public purse. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you and I both understand, all of us understand, in 2019, we're way past that. Customs for us is not simply a checkpoint for cash collections. We must have, therefore, a service platformed upon systems which are globally compatible. I think, in short, that is what the honourable member for St. Michael South may have said in part. We need to ensure that the service that is offered in the context of customs legislation and customs architecture in Barbados is such that we are globally compatible with systems which are existing in this region and beyond this region. If we are to take a responsible role in the community of states, if we are to take a position out of which we seek better to protect our own interests, then we have to ensure that our systems are globally compatible. We must adopt best practice approach with respect to customs, as we do with respect to other things. And we have got to understand what the standards are that obtain in the world, standards which are established and then monitored by institutions to which we subscribe as a sovereign nation. And clearly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, best practice would suggest that we need to go to a situation where we can have not only advanced passenger information as we did earlier, but advanced cargo information as well. Perhaps, and some would suggest, the primary responsibility of customs is this border security frontline role. And this is not something that we can underemphasize. This is not something that we can afford to underappreciate or undervalue. Customs service is in the front line as an institution, as an architecture to protect the well-being of our national borders and our people here at home. We can't do that in a context where we take an approach which suggests the philosophy of an isolationist. We are part of a world, we are part of a region, and our own security will be enhanced by the systems we establish, but those systems we establish are in the context of what the global trends and the global standards and the global requirements are. And I believe that this is what has brought us here today. I believe that this is what this debate is about. It's about other things, but it is to a large part about enhancing border security. There are threats to our national well-being which emanate from the outside. There are threats to our national well-being which find their origin on the inside, internal threats. Customs as a frontline service for this country helps us to diminish the potential of those threats, both the external as well as the internal threats to our national economy and our national well-being. The minister, when presenting, the honourable minister, when presenting the bill for amendment, spoke to transformation. Transformation was spoken by the honourable minister. Transformation has to entail not only a change in systems, but must entail a change in culture. And if we are to be honest, when we stand to our feet to speak, we have to suggest and admit that there are some things about the culture that obtains around customs service in Barbados that are not desirable. Perhaps the truth is better found with reference to perception, and it may be more perception than it is reality, but I think it is a mix of both elements. And we can't talk about transformation unless we treat the radical change, whether we're dealing with how customs and customs service and customs officers are perceived, or whether or not we are dealing with the actual culture that obtains in the practices pursued by the Customs Department. Stories are legend in Barbados, and people speak with open freeness, and perhaps to a large degree out of ignorance too. And they will tell you that some of the biggest residential dwellings in this country are owned by people who work in customs in Barbados. You would have heard that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would have heard that. And that's a question of perception. I have not done any research to suggest that that is the reality, but it is the perception, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And we've got to see what can be done to change that negative perception that exists with respect to a customs service in Barbados. Where the perception gives way to reality, we've got to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that we treat to that too, because we can have all the advanced cargo information service that we want, all the advanced passenger information service that is required. But if those who have the boots on the ground and who are at the points where the rubber meets the road, if these people are not persons who are possessed of the requisite levels of integrity, if those people are not operating in a context where there are the requisite levels of accountability and scrutiny, then we still have a problem. Because I can know who is coming, and I can know what is coming, but I can wink my eye and let it pass. And I'm trying to be fair and to be honest about this. I'm saying that we have to treat to the culture where the negatives are a reality. We have to treat to those negatives. Where those negatives just simply constitute perception, we have to do what we can as a government to ensure that that perception is diminished where it is based on false reasoning or false information or any other type of falsehood. So integrity is an issue in a discussion like this. These are not simply mechanical things that we're dealing with. And once the human entity enters into the equation, then integrity is a matter to be addressed. We are going to embrace wider and better use of technology, and that is absolutely essential. And I understand from this position that it constitutes part and parcel of government's undertaking to ensure that the public service is better platformed technologically, so that there can be higher levels of accountability, so that there can be greater efficiency in the service, both to the domestic space and to export interests coming into Barbados. And we want to make sure that we facilitate business in a far better way. And to me, it is not so much about meeting any benchmarks laid down on any IMF program. It is in the interest of Barbados to ensure that we do things far more efficiently. It is the interest of Barbados to make sure that we facilitate business more efficiently to a far greater extent than we now do, both for those who are domestic operators in our home space and those who are exporting into Barbados and those who want to invest in Barbados. So we embrace very warmly the notion that we've got to expand our technological capacity to do the things that we need to do. It is good, of course, that you're going to have real-time information on movement of cargo. I mean, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I hear it said publicly by those who I guess should know that the problem we have with illegal guns is to be associated with movement of those illegal instruments through our ports of entry. Why, it's good to say that if it is true, we have to step up to the next level and try to do something to counter that. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, you and I both know that these things don't move on their own. These are inanimate objects that do not have a life of their own. So they are moving at the hand and mind and brain of somebody or somebody somewhere. And we can have all the advanced passenger information, all the advanced cargo information, but we've got to treat to the criminal element. We've got to treat to the criminal element that so interposes itself in the process as to seek to counter every positive initiative that the governments of Barbados over time have sought to put in place. Now we're treating to the criminal element at the lower level. I've said it many times here and elsewhere. A guy from Black Rock shoots a guy from Britton Hill. We will bury the guy from Britton Hill and lock up the guy from Black Rock. But we don't ever touch the big hand that put the guns in those small hands. I'm simply saying primary responsibility is to protect this country. We put in place these systems to help us better do that. But we've got to make sure that no effort is spared to get the people who would do their very best, despite these systems, to achieve their criminal purposes among us, to the detriment of all of us. So real-time information will help that. The capacity to share intelligence with those in the region and beyond, a capacity to receive intelligence from those in the region and beyond. And much has been said already about improving the risk management process associated with offering customs services and facilitating businesses in Barbados. And these things are absolutely important. But we will, I presume, as we improve the customs service, we will improve the issue of revenue collection, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I really hope that that is an objective which is achieved in short order, because there are those who will tell you the customs is one of the biggest potential areas of revenue generation for departments of revenue generation for Barbados, and a lot of revenue is lost by deficiencies in the system. It's important to me, and I wish that we can get there to a better extent at a fast pace, because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know and I know, we understand, all of us together, that if we can improve our revenue collection, in this case through the Customs Department, we can reduce our over-reliance on other burdensome measures of taxation. So if we can collect some more money from those who should be paying more at the point of entry for goods and services, well, then maybe I have a higher level of revenue, which would help my Minister of Public Works and Transport to suggest that Cabinet one day, maybe we can reduce the bus fares back a little, because we're getting a little bit more in customs. Or we can forget the health, what's it called? The health levy. It's not called a health levy, but you know what I'm talking about, health contribution. We can do away with that, because we are picking up the 1% or 2% now in terms of the increase. And that's a serious statement, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If we can improve revenue collection where obviously the potential exists, and get some of these importers here to pay what they're paying, as they should pay under the regulations, then perhaps we can reduce the level of some of the other measures of taxation which are proving to be a little bit burdensome. And maybe we can have a little bit more money to spend in the city and in the Pine and in Richmond to fix a couple of things that need to be fixed. This business of profiteering that is pursued by some among us, we need to get a handle on. Profit making is fine. Profiteering is then another issue, and hopefully we can treat to that to ease the burden on some of the rest of us. Now we have to achieve a level of sophistication, Mr. Speaker, in terms of our prevention of criminal activity. We have to achieve a level of sophistication that matches or surpasses that of the criminal element. And you know that those who are criminally minded and organized and platformed for such are assuming better levels of sophistication all of the time. And we have to match that to the extent that this advanced information regime and the total regional context in which it comes into being, the extent to which that can get us there, I happily will applaud and support. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think that I have gone beyond that point at which I plan to be on my feet, and I will stop there and thank you for your ear.
You're welcome. Member for St. George South.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I raise, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to add my few words to this bill, which seeks to amend the Customs Act, Cap 66, to provide for advanced cargo information. But, Mr. Speaker, I rise after my good friend from Christchurch, East Central, spoke in what I would term explanatory and more so informative and more so in glowing terms. And I want to begin my brief contribution by congratulating the member for Christchurch East Central, who took this bill and he spent time explaining to the public, which is critical for debate in this country as we ascend the steps to this lower chamber, and indeed those who go to the upper chamber, to make sure that our debates are indeed debates that are relevant and indeed debates that the people of this country can identify with and indeed can take the mandate of this government to see that everything we are doing is indeed transparent, on the trajectory growth path, and indeed transformative. And I come after my very good friend for St. Michael West. I haven't seen him for a while, and indeed he too made a very good contribution to this debate, and that is how it ought to be. Don't let us focus on the political divide, but focus on the issues at hand that can enhance indeed trade and business in this country. And the other members of this great institution who spoke, the member for St. Michael South, the member for the city, and indeed I come after these esteemed gentlemen who spoke in this Lord Chamber. But I want to start, Mr. Deputy Speaker, perhaps somewhat of some introspection as it relates to this institution called the Barbados Labour Party. And indeed, that period, 1956 to 1961, we saw this institution conceptualize and indeed construct that port of Bridgetown, the Deepwater Harbor. And indeed, we saw it fit then, looking ahead some 100 years, that we needed a port for the movement of goods regionally and extra-regionally. But we didn't stop there as a Labour Party government. We came back some 17 years later, and we spent some $22 million upgrading the Deepwater Harbor facility to ensure and to make sure that ships of greater depth enter this country in terms of the improvement of business and trade, both regionally and extra-regionally. But we didn't stop there, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In 2002, we again did an upgrade in that wonderful place, the Deepwater Harbor, again to allow larger ships to enter the port, cruise ships, cargo ships, and we developed what we call the various terminals and ports within the Bridgetown port. So we call it within the Bridgetown port what we call the sheds. And there's one common thread there, and we did that with a view as a Labour Party government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to enhance business and trade facilitation in this beautiful Barbados we call our home. And as we seek to reduce all the technical barriers to trade, whether it is with the Cotonou Agreement, the CARIFORUM, EU, EPA agreement, what is fundamental to what we are doing and what the member for Christchurch East Central spoke about this morning as it relates to this bill, advanced cargo information, is to make sure that Barbados is seen as a country that you can engage in legitimate or legal trade and business facilitation, with a view that our competitiveness as a nation will indeed be first world. And I wrap everything that we did from 1956 to present, 1978 to 2002, and now again, this great institution again, the Labour Party government, we're back at it again in 2019, transforming this beautiful land we call our home. Welcome, member for my good friend for Christchurch. So, now, we recognize that customs has responsibility not only for border protection, but they play a fundamental role in business facilitation in this country. And I again want to compliment the member, this is his bill, for explaining to the country the whole role of advanced cargo information and where the Asikuda world fits into this with respect to improving and enhancing trade in this country and the ease of doing business. And he said, and I was here making copious notes. Thank you, my friend. Copious notes. And he said that the Asikuda world is indeed the foundation for bigger things. And indeed, when all the dots have been aligned, what he's saying to this country is that the customs and the other agencies that are responsible for trade, facilitation, imports and exports in this country would indeed have an easier path to doing business. And one thing I heard him mention is the whole aspect of reducing costs. And I heard the honorable member for St. Michael West, and yes, when he speaks, I make notes, because at the end of the day, I have to make sure that the honorable member for St. Michael West is not misrepresenting this government. He did not do that today. He did not do that today. Yeah, yes, he signed on to it, yes. But what he did mention is that he would like that after we have implemented this advanced cargo information system, or if you want to call it business system, he would like to see that some of the benefits, he can correct me, can go to reducing bus fares in this country. But there was a study that showed that bus fare is indeed below what it ought to be in this country. And indeed, that is the Labour Party government who indeed, we understand the plight of the citizens of this country, especially the working class people. But what I can say to you, Deputy Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that the advanced cargo information system will indeed redound to a reduction of cost of doing business in this country. And I think that is fundamental. And I want the member for St. Michael West to understand that. And he is nodded in acknowledgement. Because at the end of the day, what we are doing as a government since 1956, and I want us to recognize our role as a Labour Party administration since 1956, as it relates to that wonderful place we call the harbour, the Water Harbour and the Bridgetown Port. We are now at a stage of digitization, our processes. And we're not just doing it because it sounds like a nice thing to do in this country. But again, we are doing it with a view to put this lovely 166 square miles and our citizens and our businesses on a platform whereby we can compete and we can recognize that we too can return to those glory days whereby we can punch above our weight. And that digitization process, as it relates to the advanced cargo system and the Assecuda world, that is the foundation for the electronic single window. And I'm happy that the member for Christchurch East Central explained it. I don't have to repeat for fear of the Deputy Speaker asking me to sit. The repetition is indeed
I think you're doing well. Keep on that point.
And that is what we are doing as a country.
Yeah.
That is what we are doing as a government. The whole aspect of digitizing our processes with a view to lower the cost of doing business in this country. And indeed, with a view to reducing our technical barriers to trade as it relates to extra-regional trade. And we have to understand that that is a big picture.
Right.
So that is, whereas I don't want to throw bus fares out through the window, because that is fundamental to the people who live in St. George and in St. Michael South and in St. John and in St. Peter. They catch bus, and indeed some of these persons are indeed having a challenge at this stage, which we intend to fix, and we are on our way to fix it. That's why we are here in this Lord Chamber speaking about the digitization process and this advanced cargo information system. Because when we are finished, and we have started to put back money into this economy, and when we are finished, I don't think the honorable member for St. Michael West, I don't call him a pundit today, but those are the pundits who are out there, you know, will have nothing but wonderful things to say about this administration. Because the ease of doing business, Deputy Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, cuts across every class and every sphere in this country. And I'm going to speak to it. Because when we import goods into our country, it comes through that wonderful port that the Barbados Labour Party built. And I will echo those sentiments everywhere you go, because we have to trump the Barbados Labour Party's legacy in this country and in this Lord Chamber. And every time I speak, I will do it, because that is the legacy on which I am here. That is the legacy on which I was built, that Grantley Adams legacy. And indeed, when we import items into this country and we export items, who are responsible? All this government is doing is creating the enabling environment for business to flourish in this country. And indeed, I have the responsibility, that lovely responsibility that I'm enjoying day by day. And indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was there at 8 a.m. this morning. You can ask the security.
I'm very proud of you.
I have that responsibility. I have that responsibility.
I'm very proud of you.
It is nice to laugh. And I see the honourable member for St. Michael West. It is a joy to see you smiling in this Lord Chamber, member. And I have that responsibility for enabling business, especially micro, small, and the medium enterprise sector in this country. And when we analyze the role that that sector plays in this country, that sector is responsible for roughly 40 to 50% of gross domestic product in this country. And when you look at trade and business facilitation in this country, you would understand why this debate is of so much importance to the ease of doing business in this country. Because when you have those persons, and I can call one man, not by name, but by business, to someone importing some input to production in this country. And I can utilize that place that I formerly occupied for close to 20 years in St. Lucie. And I had the responsibility for procurement, purchasing parts, oil, equipment, raw materials all over the world for 3 years at that wonderful institution that employs 200 people. And I stress, employ 200 persons in this country, because when we deal with archaic systems in our Bridgetown port, what it does, it delays business in this country. Because you can shut down a plant, you can shut down a facility for one piece of equipment. And as a technical man, I will go further. You can shut down that institution for the want of one bearing for a piece of equipment. And indeed, if we don't have our systems in place to tell us, you know, when our equipment and our materials and our goods, you can look into one window as customs and the brokers and you can see, oh yes, this has left Suriname or this has left Dominican Republic on X date and it is due to arrive in our country on X date. And you can plan as a businessman and as a private company entity, you can plan around your delays. But if you don't have those systems in place, you run the risk of impacting more than 200 employees. You run the risk of impacting related businesses who rely on you as well, because it is a ripple effect. Because some of those small business persons, those persons who are doing the hustling and those persons who play in the trade by their vans traveling around to these businesses selling fruits and selling food. Once that piece of equipment goes down, what it speaks to? A ripple effect on unemployment. The itinerant vendor who drives in their van, they don't have an outlet. So again, don't only see it as delays to one institution, but it has a ripple effect to the itinerant vendors. It has a ripple effect to those persons in the apparel industry. It has a ripple effect to those persons also in the cultural industry. Has a ripple effect to those persons in the agricultural industry. The delays, member for St. Philip South, he knows very well what I'm speaking about. It has a ripple effect for those in the renewable energy sector. And indeed, these are the sectors that have been positioned by this administration to transform this economy. So when I speak, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am speaking looking at the ease of doing business and business facilitation and also trade facilitation. And that brings me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to my role as the Minister of Small Business and Entrepreneurship and Commerce. The Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, they work closely with customs, very closely with customs, because they have a duty to you, the people of this country, under the Miscellaneous and Controls Act, under the Weights and Measures Act, under the Standards Act, and under the Consumers Protection Act. And I heard the honourable member for St. Michael West speaking about standards. He seems to understand what he was talking about. Because, and I said that positively, sir. That's a compliment. Because the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, they have now, and I want to thank the honourable member, the Prime Minister of this country, and the honourable member for Christchurch Central, for recognizing the role that the Department of Commerce has to play in business facilitation in this country. Because what they have done, they have allowed the Department of Commerce to return to the Bridgetown port, to occupy a station that we as a government, a Labour Party government, open for the Department of Commerce so that they can verify goods coming into this country as it relates to the import license that we issue on a daily basis to business people in this country. And what that does, if you're importing rice, we go to the Bridgetown port to make sure that indeed you're importing rice and not contraband. That's the role of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs along with the customs. So when we examine the role that we have to play as a ministry in border protection. And I heard the honorable member for the city, a man that I have a lot of respect for, and who has taught me a lot as it relates to security measures in this country. And we as parliamentarians ought not to take our security lightly. And indeed, those measures that this government have instituted in the Bridgetown port, not only to look at the introduction of scanners, but to make sure that quality products are indeed coming into this country, so that if you say you're importing rice, you're importing rice and not feed. And indeed, it is a part of border protection. And I want to again congratulate the honorable member and the Prime Minister of this country, because we cannot forget the Prime Minister of this country, because most of what we are doing in here, she is leading this charge. And indeed, I want us to recognize that leadership matters in this country in whatever we are doing. So the Department of Commerce, we will continue to play our part in terms of border protection. We will continue to play our part and our role on behalf of this government as it relates to issuing of licenses, legitimate licenses to impact trade and the ease of doing business in this country. We will continue to play our part as a ministry to ensure that we carry out our due diligence. And indeed, the time will come when the electronic single window will be built on the foundation of the Asikuda world, and we will become fully digitized, so that our custom brokers, our Ministry of Health, our Ministry of Agriculture, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in terms of the technical barriers to trade and removing those technical barriers to trade, so we can again be seen as a country that is punching above our weight, and we will be improving our competitiveness. And indeed, I heard the member for St. Michael South, he mentioned our ease of doing business report, and we are at number 127 out of 190, 129 out of 190. And I'm saying that with the implementation of the advanced cargo information, with the implementation of the Asikuda world, with the implementation of the electronic single window, where every single agency, government agency, can look into one window and see when goods are inbound and see when goods are outbound. And indeed, what it does, it reduces the cost of doing business, so that the minister, the member for the city, and the member for St. Philip South, Agriculture and Health, they can have their officers sit at their stations and approve whether it is a certificate to be approved by health in the electronic single window, or whether it is a certificate to be approved by agriculture. They can sit at their desk as opposed to driving to and fro. Time is money. Time is of essence. And indeed, those are some of the digitization processes that will enhance Barbados' competitiveness, and indeed reduces reduce our technical barriers to trade, to ensure that as we operate within the CARIFORUM EU EPA agreement, indeed we become a force to reckon with in this country. And I want to end by urging the customs, and I heard the member for St. Michael West, he spoke to it, the member for the city. We are at a stage in our country, development, whereby we have to forget the small things, and we have to focus on the bigger picture. We have to make sure that this nation has long-lasting prosperity for those young people, for those 1-year-olds and 6-month-olds that are coming on. So I urge customs to indeed Structure follows strategy. And I heard a member, he spoke about having the customs officers, employing the customs officers. But I sent a message to the customs officers. There are some wonderful customs officers. There are some wonderful customs officers. But those who are not in line and are not falling in line, they have to recognize that their role as customs officers, 1, border protection, and 2, business facilitation. Border protection speaks to dealing with any contraband or illegality coming through the port. But indeed, the whole business facilitation aspect speaks to growth in this country. And indeed, the customs officers, they have to do what is legally right by law, whether it is the Customs Act, it is the Miscellaneous and Controls Act, to ensure that we get containers out of the port as swiftly as possible, to ensure that business facilitation, and to ensure that our operations in this country, as it relates to the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector, is given its fair share. I have received a number of complaints from businessmen and businesswomen in this country of products being held up in the Bridgetown port. I am not here to apportion blame, but all I'm here to say to the customs officers, work with the businesses. They have a role to play in building out this economy. Once you have facilitated your border protection measures, let's work with these businesses to get the containers out of the port swiftly. Let's not, as the member for St. Michael West spoke to, let's not focus on handouts and handbacks and hands up and hands crossed. Let's all deal with business facilitation and see your role as being critical to improving the ease of doing business in this country. And those are my parting words, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the Customs. And I am confident, being led by the member for Christchurch East Central, that the strategy is right. And I am confident that a good structure will indeed follow the strategy. And those are my words.
Thank you very well. Before the honourable member speak, I just want to inform members that while we do not play to the gallery, the report is that the debate is of a very high quality today. I want to thank members for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I trust that I'll be able to continue the tradition.
Member for St. James South.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I trust I'll be able to continue the tradition, to continue to impress you. No pressure, no pressure. And I really want to thank the honourable member for Christchurch East Central. This is such a welcome piece of legislation, because in the Ministry of Foreign Trade, we have to deal with a lot of the matters that affect trade, and therefore the action of customs or the inaction of customs either makes our job really, really difficult and makes it difficult to advance trade. And one of the things that I've learned since coming into the ministry is that an overwhelmed, under-resourced customs working with archaic processes can actually slow down the growth of an economy. That is how important customs is. And I want to thank the members of the Customs Department who have sought to keep their department afloat and who sought to keep the motion going. But I know that they too welcome these changes, because these changes are going to help Barbados to do a number of things. First of all, at the level of trade, in COTED, part of what we do in the Ministry of Foreign Trade is we are working, for example, to be able to support the Barbados government in developing trade agreements. And when you sign a trade agreement with a country where you're going to open trade, it is anticipated and expected that we will facilitate that trade in a way so as to make it easy for the imports and exports to happen. It is seen as an act of bad faith for you to be signing agreements with people for trade, and then your systems do not support that trade, or it hinders that trade, or it makes it expensive to do the trade. And this is what we have been buttoned upon. So serious is the issue of how customs does its work that at the WTO, trade facilitation is a big matter that is now engaging the attention of the World Trade Organization. A number of countries who are not compliant with their notifications, who are not compliant with their ratifications, who are not compliant with putting systems in place to facilitate trade will actually come under the displeasure of the WTO and can be sanctioned. And this is something that right now Barbados is battling, and part of what the minister is doing is helping us to be able to comply with our WTO obligations, because it has implications and costs for Barbados. And in terms of the entire customs system, it is important that you simplify your regulations and processes, that you make it easy for people to comply, for people to be able to use the system to get their trade done. It needs to be modernized so that you're using the very best technology to help you to be as efficient as possible and minimize wastage of time. Harmonization. And I am so happy, and he knows this. My colleagues from Christchurch, East Central knows that I sometimes have to give him an elbow at cabinet and ask him, what about so and so and so and so? So he knows that I'm a very happy camper here today. Harmonization of our system is important. When Barbados is using an antiquated Assecuda system and everybody else has gone on to the most modern platform, it is embarrassing when you are engaging your colleagues, whether at Quartet or in another forum about trade, that we are using a system that does not meet or comply with what everybody else is using. So I am so delighted today to know that we are putting wrong things right, because all of this helps with the ease of doing business. And my colleagues have shared about that. They've shared where Barbados is in relation to the other countries. We're at 129 out of 190 countries. Is a place of embarrassment. But you know what is more embarrassing? Who are the countries that are in front of us? Now, everybody expects that all the developed world will be in front of us. Everybody expects that some of the bigger countries would be in front of us. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I have to sit at an international conference and hear that Jamaica is ahead of us, Panama is ahead of us, Malta is ahead of us, St. Lucia, Little Dominica, Trinidad, Antigua, Bahamas, Belize. Our comrades in the region are doing better than we are at the ease of doing business. And Barbados is not accustomed to being behind in this fashion. So I am so delighted that we are trying to catch up, that we can again ascend to a place where we can hold our head high in the region, that Barbados is a place that can do business. Now, what does that do? It helps to protect foreign exchange earnings. If people have too much trouble executing business in a country, they go elsewhere. If you cannot resolve trade disputes because you cannot get your information from customs in a timely way, businesses lose their contracts. When that happens, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you are talking about not only foreign exchange losses, you are speaking of job losses, because sometimes you may not be able to regain a contract. Customs is so central, it's like the heartbeat to your trade, and therefore it is important that it is properly staffed, it is efficient, and that they have a clear vision of what their role is, and they play it with alacrity, with dedication, and with commitment. Other than that, they cause an economy to suffer. It is not only the loss of foreign exchange and jobs, but when you are inefficient in processing people's goods, the cost of goods will rise, and the consumer now suffers, because any cost incurred by a company through delays in clearing goods, wrong application of duty, if there's not the proper application of duty to your competitor, all of these things then affect your enterprise's capacity to be competitive one against the other. And what can happen if you don't address those issues? You can find that your enterprises can fail, and you have fewer and fewer players in a sector, resulting in a monopoly or an oligopoly, and the end result is that the consumer will suffer because the consumer does not have an alternative, because the economy becomes uncompetitive when your customs department is unable to deliver on its promise of not only protecting the borders but advancing trade. And this is why the reforms are extremely critical. So I'm not going to detain the chamber long, simply because many people have covered the areas, but I wanted to be able to express my congratulations to the honorable member. I wanted Barbadians to know that this is an extremely important piece of legislation that is being passed, and that the other pieces that are to come and that are in the works are going to be critical to our well-being as a nation. If Barbados is going to have economic growth, then the issue of readying all of our systems and making sure that they work effectively is going to matter to our future. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with those few words, I offer my congratulations, and I fully support this piece of legislation and look forward to more.
I'm obliged.
I thank you.
I'm obliged. All members of Christchurch East Central.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, in winding up this debate, I want to just address a few of the concerns which were raised, or just to respond to some of the concerns raised. And I do accept your advice with respect to the issue of training. Now, during my presentation, I did allude to the fact that as part of the process with respect to the introduction of technology, that the training with respect to the customs officers now have to, in a sense, be much more dynamic and engaging going forward. I did speak to the new skills that will have to be brought into the department, and that the training that will also accompany those new skills with respect to being able to put the Customs Department in a position to respond to the 21st century requirements in terms of what is required for a Customs Department. Now, on that basis, though, sir, I must say to you that in response to your query, and I know the honourable member for St. Michael West would have raised it. In my interactions with the Customs Department over the last, specifically over the last few weeks, it brought to my attention that there really has been no consistent training put in place over the last few years. And it is something that, in listening to the customs officers, when we were last in office, it was a matter of, in a sense, routine that training took place. Now, you would have heard certainly the Prime Minister speak to the massive training initiative that is required now under the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program that is required for the whole country to be able to go through to make sure that we can train for excellence in every respect.
Right.
And we have, as we are going through this specific reform exercise within the Customs Department, training certainly is at the center of what we are doing. And so even now, with respect to the imminent implementation of Asecura World, there's training specifically for that. But outside of these, the training that are required for that, as we rebuild the department and where officers can be redeployed internally with respect to the department, then it means that there must, as a matter of course, be an enhancement of the training of the officers and the engagement from that perspective in order for the Customs Department to be in a position to respond to the myriad of queries that would confront it on a consistent basis. So training is a critical part of the reform exercise. And we don't take this for granted simply because with the introduction of technology, that has its own requirement for training, sensitizing officers with respect to the change in the processes that are required from that perspective. But in general, sir, even as it relates to legislation, and as we have come here on several occasions, and we've done, the truth is, sir, as you know, this is our 44th sitting since we came into office. And the reality is, sir, that we have done so much across a whole suite of legislation with respect to government. Even the sensitization of officers, specifically with respect to what is, because we have been able to, I think, drive through an agenda from a legislative standpoint that has been quite swift, and therefore it means that even with respect to the implementation, that from that perspective we also have to be mindful that as we do stuff here, that it ripples into the actual procedures within the various government departments, because as we are moving forward, sir, things are moving very swiftly, and the government must be in a position to respond to that. And so as part of the rebuilding of the department, part of the training, and I think that's something that we have started, because as we are doing the preparation work with respect to the implementation of Asecura World, the Customs Department and the Classification Committee specifically of the Customs Department will now liaise with not just the members of government, but certainly members of the private sector and agencies of the private sector, because members have raised the issue, and I certainly would have done it tangentially, relates to the fact that decisions to be taken by government departments impact businesses in a myriad of ways. And therefore, as part of the normal operating procedure of customs, you can call it training if you like, is to work in a much more collaborative way with the private sector, such that whether there are issues of classification, whether there are issues with respect to the standard operating procedures, and just by way, sir, of providing information to the public. Because I think part of what has happened, certainly over the last few years, and I want in one of the meetings just 3 weeks ago, I asked whether or not the Customs Department had a social media presence, and the answer was no. And I asked myself how it is that you are in the 21st century, and a department as critical as the Customs Department does not have some social media presence, with a view certainly of being able to communicate with people almost in real time. Now, the reality is, sir, whilst Customs has, and certainly in the context of the port, there's an ecosystem within that space, the reality is that as a critical department, which we have deemed to be fundamentally important to the success of the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, that it must, as a matter of course, and it will require some training on the part of customs officers to be able to communicate with the public and with the various stakeholders in a manner that's as effective as possible. Because much of what has been put out into the public domain, it is not always 100% accurate, and therefore the department must be, in my view, must be in a position to be able to communicate with the public and say what is and what isn't, such that the engagement or the interactions that the public may have with the department can be done and judged on the basis of what is. And certainly going forward, that is going to be a critical part of our reform agenda, because we have given a commitment to the country that we will be open as a government, we will be transparent as a government, and therefore that has to translate down to each department. And I believe, sir, that the Customs Department, as a critical institution that interfaces with the public, obviously on a daily basis across a wide cross-section of people, that perhaps it does not have the best perception, but we believe that we can help shape that perception by being able to not just to train officers in terms of how to communicate and to deal with the public, because oftentimes it is not, the Customs Department is just the facilitator of the clearance of the items. And once you have to engage customs to get your items, if you have not had if you don't have the appropriate license or what have you, the word on the ground is that it is customs that stopping you from getting your items. And the reality is that the officers can only do that which they are, in a sense, the regulations allow them to do. And so therefore, because the customs officer is the person in a sense, in the firing line, stands between ourselves and our cargo or our items, then they will face the wrath, so to speak. But I believe, sir, that certainly as we close out, we are in the second half of 2019, and the reality is, sir, is that we have to, the Customs Department must establish as soon as possible not just a social media presence, but certainly an online presence, because part of the internal reforms as well, in addition to putting in these technology pieces, is to be able to to do the payments with respect to the clearance of goods in a digital way, so that we remove the entire cash and checks away from that reconciliation process. And in a real sense, sir, then redeploy the people that we currently have at the Bridgetown port. And for example, we have a room down there, sir, with about 6 or 7 persons in it. And you go from a window here, and you go around, and you go around, and you go around until you get to the right side. And the truth is, sir, it is a very inefficient process. Yeah. And it is not the best use of the bodies that you have available, because we want and this is where the training now and the redeployment, and they speak to that, and perhaps they didn't make it clear, in that there are persons within the Customs Department have knowledge of customs, and so part of the transition is to get some of those persons trained now to become customs officers, to perform more customs functions rather than the administrative function of collecting money and checking paperwork. And therefore, part of the reason why we want to move to introduce these pieces of technology is to be able to redeploy. Because, as I said, we have a shortage of customs officers doing the customs functions in terms of the examinations and those procedures, but we have personnel at the various sites who are engaged in administrative works, that once we get the technology piece in place and the training in place, as I said, we created the Customs Officer 4 posts, that these persons with customs knowledge can be trained then to transition to be redeployed within the department. Because once we get the systems in place, then it means then that as persons go to engage the customs department wherever, that they can have a much more efficient flow, but then it also means that we can free up, in a real sense, some of those persons to be redeployed elsewhere in the department in the short term, which we hope will help ease some of the waiting times with respect to the current operations of the department. And the reality, sir, is from top to bottom within the department, there's significant need for training of all types, because the customs department has been dealt a very, 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 very raw deal, sir. And with the best will in the world, sir, the reality is that the previous administration did not provide any support at all to ensure that the department would be able to do a decent job in the eyes of the public. And as you know, sir, our philosophy, we have sought to engage everybody. We rub shoulders from St. Lucie to Ragged Point, sir. And we have sought to engage people, listen, communicate at all levels. And which is completely, in a sense, contrary to how the previous administration operated. So in transitioning now and reforming the customs department, communication now, in a real sense, as part of our philosophy, we now have to create the environment where the department gets comfortable with sharing information with the public and doing so in a timely manner, in a consistent manner, without necessarily any prompting from the minister or from the Ministry of Finance. Because it is creating that engagement, and that is why we have sought, with respect to the classification committee, to involve the private sector. And then with respect to the standard operating procedures, to again involve the private sector. Because on a daily basis, sir, when there are issues to be resolved, it means that the department must have a structure in place where customs can have its view, engaging the stakeholders, and once a consensus is reached with respect to how to respond to a certain matter, then that can be communicated with the entire public, so that whether any of us in here or any of our constituents, sir, engages the customs department, irrespective of whichever officer happens to be on duty, what we are trying to put in place is to make sure that there's consistency with respect to treatment, so that there can be little room for interpretation, if you like, other than that which has been agreed by consensus. Because there has always been a long complaint, sir, that when you or I go to a particular port of entry, that you and I may be engaging in the same activity, but somehow or the other, the treatment may be different. And that is what we are trying to make sure we get away from, because the systems now and the process through which we want to engage, not just the training of the customs officers specifically, but to develop a culture where, on the one hand, the officers can be given the support and the training with respect to upgrading their IT skills, the accounting skills, what have you. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to attract some of those skills into the department to perform those functions. But ensuring information on a consistent basis with the public, such that you don't get, sir, because of a lack of information being provided, opportunities where persons can, in a sense, either go against that which is supposed to be the standard operating procedure, and we want to make sure that that is consistent in every time, so that the training has to be rooted in the consistency, the communication, but where there's an issue, that you can resolve it and communicate it almost immediately, so that tomorrow or this afternoon, if there's a change in policy, that change in policy is communicated to all the stakeholders, so that everybody has access to the same information in real time. So that there's no perception that I may know more than you, or I may know something that you don't know, or you know something that I don't know, sir. And this is where the publishing of information, as far as the department is concerned, is going to be critical with respect to communication going forward. Now, sir, and so at all levels, from the most junior levels, and certainly as we seek to engage those at the top, training within the department and training across government is going to be absolutely critical for these reform measures to obviously take root. And we are vested in it, and we are going to, in very short order, as soon as the new management personnel come on board, then we will recommence those training programs that we would have had in place before with respect to customs officers. Because, as I said, in trying to transition those with customs knowledge currently in the department who are not designated as customs officers, we need to get those persons trained and deployed, obviously with more experienced officers to be able to assist in the short term, whilst we're in a position then obviously to make sure that the effective rollout of not just the Asicuda, but the Asicuda world, but the advanced cargo information systems, that from a strategic standpoint, that we can mitigate against any specific fallout that may come with respect to moving from Asicuda Plus to Asicuda World. Now, much of what was said, I think, by members in the debate, and I want to elaborate on a couple other points before we conclude. Now, sir, the cost considerations with respect to the review of the systems have been at the center of the reform efforts to date. And it is instructive that we have not had a significant review of the processes within not just the government, the Customs Department, but I think members in the chamber would have to admit that across a number of departments of government, there hasn't been a review of the procedures with the intent of responding in a way that improves the facilitation across the board. And from that perspective, I want to speak about how we manage the change. Because whilst the introduction of technology, as I had mentioned, is necessary, it is not sufficient to yield the results that one would have. And therefore, the change management that is critical in terms of the culture of the department, and certainly across government, but certainly the way that work is done, and to sensitize the officers as to the priorities that we want to set out with respect to how the department functions is critical. And as we have gone through these series of meetings to date, I've been at pains and I know the honourable member for the city of Bridgetown would have pointed out in his contribution the importance of security. And as you know, sir, earlier this year, we placed the Customs Department under the Protective Services Commission, along with the police, the fire service, and other discipline forces, with a view, sir, of making sure that the issues that are peculiar to those departments can be advanced from an administrative standpoint. But more than that, sir, the security element, as I mentioned in my presentation, is absolutely critical. So I want to assure the chamber that the national security objectives and the role that the Customs Department will play going forward, or will continue to play going forward, is highest on the priority of the government and certainly the Ministry of Finance. And to the extent that we are here now just making sure that from a systems point of view, that we deploy the systems appropriate to support the national security objectives, but that the training now with respect to the officers and the change management is now also critical and important with respect to being able to respond in that manner. And that is why under certainly the leadership of the Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Michael North East, we have moved as quickly as we can to be able to respond to those national security objectives. But what is required now is, I suppose, greater training and sensitization with respect to the officers at the border and the sharing of information, because these systems now have to go in. And as these systems go in, obviously then the sharing of information, I suppose, on a need-to-know basis with respect to what's happening at any given time. And there's an element within the amendments that makes reference to the minister responsible for national security and the minister who's responsible for finance in this instance. Happens to be one and the same, but there's specific reference in here as to the allowance for, or the waiving of the requirement for provisional information, because as you well know, sir, a lot of these issues center on security, and to the extent that persons may or may not, or need to know about what's happening because you're tracking things from a security perspective is critical. And so therefore, training about the classification, certainly of information and those kinds of things would be critical, so that whilst one cannot always say what is the purpose for an exemption or not, which is well understood, people oftentimes would ask questions. And I give you an example, sir. Someone asked me the other day about an aircraft at the airport, for example. And I had to indicate that, and they specifically said about it was a 737 or 747, I believe, with a Barbados flag on it, Barbados registration. Now, the reality is, sir, that in these circumstances, you have people working in an environment, and people will see things and they will ask questions. And in seeing things and asking questions, there needs to be within the confines of not just, and I'm not talking about the customs now, but I'm talking about within these jurisdictions where you have things happening, there must be a sensitization with respect to persons that, yes, you may see things happening within the airport or the port or what have you, but there must be a clearly defined process in place that gives information to the right persons, so that you don't get this speculation with respect to what is the purpose of the presence of a particular ship or aircraft or what have you. Now, of course, you know, sir, we can't stop people from seeing. And the reality is that if an aircraft is on the tarmac, people can see that the aircraft is on the tarmac. And if a ship is in the harbor, people will see that a ship is in the harbor. And with the best will in the world, those questions and the way that they are responded to obviously will be critical in the context of whether or not there's a national security concern where information may be censored with respect to what is. But as I said, the way that is managed and communicated is absolutely critical as part of this, as we implement these strategies. Because as the honourable member for the city, would have indicated, as part of our regional counterterrorism strategy, the sharing of information between agencies, not just in Barbados, but certainly regionally, is critical. And one must be able to trust that those that you are sharing information with are, in a sense, trustworthy, and such that any particular interventions will be protected, and obviously, in a sense, those who may be carrying out any specific operation may very well also be protected. And those are some of the very critical things that persons must be able to understand, that you can see, as my grandmother says, sir, and don't see. Because it is absolutely important that that sensitization is reached, so that you don't get a lot of banter about certain things. And sir, the honourable member for St. Michael West raised some concerns about the negative perception of customs officers, and that is out there. The truth is, sir, in part, having come into this position and looked at the operations of the Customs Department, they are, and quite legitimately, when you look at the allowances that officers are paid for the various tasks and duties that they undertake, officers do actually, outside of what you see in the publishing of the personal emoluments for customs officers, what is not published there really is the schedule of allowances and stuff that are paid to customs officers, in part for overtime on the one hand, but then there are a myriad of other allowances that are paid to customs officers for the facilitation efforts that they undertake in the country. And the reality is, sir, that some customs officers actually earn a whole lot more than most other public servants and most other persons in the country. And it is not out of any nefarious, specifically any nefarious activity. Their duties, for the most part, when you look at the times that they perform their duties, what the allowances are, then in truth and in fact, you can see if the officer cared to open up their books to see that what you may perceive as negative with respect to what a customs officer may or may not own, that in truth and in fact they can actually substantiate with respect to how they have worked. And the reality is, sir, that one of the areas where in a sense the allowances are quite substantial is that of the area of the petroleum officer. The nature of the petroleum officer and the work that they undertake, as you know, the ships come off of oil-stains, and the oil is pumped off through the terminal. And the reality is, sir, is that the times that takes place is often at a time that is not during normal working hours. And therefore, that is facilitated as a specific activity. And then all the other works with respect to the terminal and stuff like that is an area that particular officer who happens to be working in that space may very well, in terms of the take-home pay, is actually quite substantial. No, but this is very legitimate because it's part of their duties with respect to that. And that's just one area. And customs officers perform a myriad of other functions outside of when you or I may go to the port and see them there at the port inspecting the items. They're all over the place doing a whole host of things to make sure that, again, that the border security concerns are met and that the trade facilitation and business facilitation is done. Now, having said that, one of the obviously long-standing issues with respect to perception has always been, I see it as more of a matter of provision of information. People have always asked how it is that customs will come up with a valuation, because my determination of value and customs determination of value is very different. And the reality is that the customs officer's job is to make sure, once it gets to that particular stage, once there are no issues with respect to security, the job of the customs officer is to make sure that the value that you have declared is actually the right value. And with the best will in the world, sir, there are some of us who are very creative and will try to present to the officer information that is not fully accurate. And let me give you an example, sir. Let's say, for example, sir, that I may be purchasing some items from you, from yourself, from overseas. But you, sir, give me a payment arrangement that says that I can give you 25% of what the cost is up front, and I can pay you over the next 6 months. So what I may presume to do now, sir, is to present the down payment, the 25% down payment that I've given to you, to the customs officer at the border to represent the cost with respect to what the item is. Now, the customs officer, in saying this, has to question, in a sense, well, what is really going on, because they know that in Barbados, in the market, given all that's happening, that the information that I may be presenting to them may not be fully accurate. But the customs officer does not immediately have available to them the information or the agreement between you and I that over the next 90 days or 180 days, I can pay you the rest of the money. But the items are here on the basis of the down payment that I gave to you. And so these are issues that some of us, sir, present to the customs officer. And the customs officer, in doing their job, knowing what's going on in Barbados, they have an inkling of what's going on. They have an inkling in what's going on. But the public perception is that somehow or the other, the customs officer is trying to either extract or trick people or what have you. But the reality is, sir, that we are putting the systems in place that would allow us to be able to truly assess what are the value of things, and it's something that's going to take some time, because with the best will in the world, the officer has a job to do to make sure that the information that is presented to them for the clearance of any items is accurate, such that the revenue that's collected is sound. Because if on the basis, sir, of a 25% deposit that I've paid to you, you give me an invoice with respect to that, the duties assessed and the revenue collected will just be 25% of the revenue that is supposed to be collected on that item. And therefore, it means then that the Customs Department would not be collecting the level of revenue that they ought to collect. And so therefore, the systems that we are seeking to put in place will help to resolve some of those issues, but it's something that the country needs to appreciate, that the customs officer, their job is to verify, based on all the available information, that the information that is presented to them is certainly the most accurate. And all I will say, sir, is that whilst that may not be good news for some people, the reality is that the officers have to do their job. And when the officers do their job well, it means that the provision of goods and services from a public sector perspective can be secured, because it means that the revenue that the officers are collecting would be the right amount of revenue, so that the government can help execute the mandate that the people want us to be able to execute. But if persons are out there trying to trick the Customs Department, in the end what happens, sir, is all that happens is that then the government is, as a whole, is not able to help drive the agenda that people want. So in a real sense, you got to help yourself. So therefore, as I said, we will trust, but we will verify. And there are provisions specifically within the Customs Act which will come. There's some amendments with respect to some of the fines that are to be levied, because the truth is, sir, that for too long we simply did not put the right systems in place to be able to give the Customs Department all of the necessary tools to be able to deal with some of these substantive matters. And so this is just the start, sir. This is just the start. And I say to you, through you, sir, to the customs officers and to the public, that over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, these reforms are going to start to pay dividends. But as we go through that process, there will be times where things may not go 100% of how we would like. But we will face it, sir. We will communicate, and we will get it right. And our commitment, sir, as a government has always been to take the responsibility that has been handed to us and to move this country, and certainly this government, the public finances, and the various departments, sir, in a completely different direction. And our mission, sir, really, within the context of the Ministry of Finance, ultimately, is not just to collect revenue, but obviously to be able to make it as easy as possible, using the full systems of government for persons to do their private business, as well as to do their professional business in as easy a fashion as possible. And once we are putting these systems in place and managing the change by having the various institutional support, and that is why, as I said earlier, sir, that the support of the management to come, the long-term customs export, will go a long way with respect to being able to drive some of the reforms forward. And so, sir, these these amendments before the House are critical, and without it, sir, we will not be in a position to move forward. And on that score, I want to also impress upon not just the Customs Department, but the various agencies, that as we drive through these reforms, that there will be a need for collaboration and cooperation, because the Customs Department is going to be very, 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 very busy in a sense over the next few months, and therefore we will try as much as possible to coordinate the various linkages to make sure that we can work once and work smart. And with those few words, sir, I am obliged to you. I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Someone second it? Seconded. The question is that this bill be read a second time. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. You got a point. Yeah, you got to get a point.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the honourable member for Christchurch South be appointed to temporarily as chairman of committees for today's session.
Seconded. The question is that the member for Christchurch South be appointed temporary chairman of committees for today's sitting. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Member for Christchurch South is now appointed as temporary chairman of committees. You got to ask that you leave the chair.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself in committee for further consideration of this bill.
Yeah, question is that I do not leave the chair and this House resolve itself in committee for further consideration of this bill. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Michael, this is number 3, right? This is customs amendment.
He will come. So I got to see nothing yet. Not yet. Okay, good. When he comes, he will host the chairman.
A minor amendment, Mr. Chairman, is the bill is actually order number 6 on the supplementary order paper.
Very well. As you wish.
To 5.
Chair, I beg to move that clauses 1 to 5 stand part.
The question is that order
Clauses 1 to 5.
clauses 5 to what?
1 to 5.
1 to 5. Stand part. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against? Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 6 to 10.
Chair, I beg to move that clauses 6 to 10 stand part.
Question is that clauses 6 to 10 stand part. All those in favor say aye. All those against? Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 11 to 15.
Chair, I beg to move that clauses 11 to 15 stand part.
Question is that clauses 11 to 15 stand part. All those in favor say aye.
In the schedule.
All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The schedule.
Chair, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
Beg to second that.
Question is that the schedule
Be the schedule to the bill.
be the schedule. Thank you. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to his deputy speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Beg to second that.
Question is that I now report to the Deputy Speaker. All those in favor say aye. All those against? Methinks the ayes have it. Thank you very much. We thought we lost you.
The chairman of committees have reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Just that. Oh. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now cited and passed as the Customs Amendment Number 3 Act 2019.
The question is that this bill be now passed and be so cited. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 4, sir. Order number 4, in the name of the Honorable Minister for Tourism.
Member for
To resume the debate on the Tourism Levy Bill 2020.
Member for St. James Central.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I seek leave to have the Tourism Levy Bill, which is now before the House, substituted for a newer version.
Substituted. Do we have a seconder, please? Question is that this bill is substituted for a new bill. All those in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. All member for St. James
Deputy
Central.
Speaker, sir, you will recall that the House had heard the debate on the previous bill, and I now move that Your Honor leave the chair for the House to go into Committee of Supply.
Seconded. The question is that I do not leave this chair and this House resolve itself in committee for further consideration of this bill. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee. Yes, please.
Clauses 1 to 5.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 1 to 5 stand part.
Question is that clauses 1 to 5 stand part. All those in favor say aye. All those against? Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 6 to 10.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clauses 6 to 10 stand part.
Beg to second that.
Question is that clauses 6 to 10 stand part. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 11 to 15.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clauses 11 to 15 stand part.
Beg to second that.
Question is that clauses 11 to 15 stand part. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 16 to 20.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clauses 16 to 20 stand part.
Question is that clauses 16 to 20 stand part. All those in favor say aye.
Beg to second that.
I beg your pardon. Do it again, please. You're seconding?
Beg to second that, sir.
Thank you. Question is that clauses 16 to 20, is it? Stand part. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 21 to 27.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 21 through 27 stand part.
Beg to second that.
Question is that clauses 21 to 27 stand part. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The first schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
Beg to second that.
Question is that the first schedule be the schedule to the bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The second schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
Beg to second that.
Question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Mr. Chairman, on the third schedule, I propose an amendment so that the amount of the product development levy effective 1st of April 2019 will be at 2.5% of the cost of the direct tourism service, as opposed to 3.75% as it now states in the bill.
Question is that an amendment be made to the third schedule as articulated by the honourable member. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fourth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
Beg to second that.
Question is that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fifth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill.
Beg to second that.
Question is that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Sixth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill.
Beg to second that.
Question is that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. School.
No, what? Yeah, sorry. Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that we now report the passage of a bill in committee.
Beg to second that.
Question is that a report of the passing of the bill now be made. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman of committees have reported the passing of one bill in committee. Member for St. James Central.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
Question is that this bill be read a third time. All the members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Cited.
I beg to move, Mrs. Deputy Speaker, that this bill be passed and cited as the Tourism Levy Act 2019.
Question is that this bill be now passed and so cited. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Member for the City of Bridgetown.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is the end of government business for the day and the end of today's sitting. I beg to move that the House be adjourned until Tuesday, 23rd of July at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.
Second is? Question is that this House will be now adjourned until July the 23rd at 10 a.m. At 10 a.m. in the morning. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The House is now adjourned until July the 23rd this year.